NFL season, obviously we were all working last night and watching the games and enjoying ourselves. And I would say, 13 games last night, and I would say 10 or even 11 of them were really good games of football in some way, shape, or form. Tight games, good comebacks, intriguing storylines. I'd suggest there were probably 2 bad games of football last night, and I broadcast those 2 games. So I'm just a little tired and a little bit all over the shop, but it's fine. We're back. It's the week 1 review. We're delighted to have football back. The Gridiron Show with me, Will Gavin, with Simon Clancy, with Olly Hunter. Hello, chaps. How are you all feeling post week 1? Only one of us didn't have week 1 disappointment. So, Simon, you must be feeling very cheery.
I'm happy. 1-0 is always good, better than 0-1, as you two could attest. I mean, I thought it was an interesting week. Like you say, lots of good games. I was quite surprised at how shabby some of the games were in terms of the performances. Tackling wasn't great, rusty, and obviously that's a knock-on effect from teams just not playing very much in the preseason. And you look at the Dolphins and my team, Jalen Waddle, Teron Armstead, neither of whom played in the preseason. Tyreek Hill had 3 snaps. Tua Tagovailoa played 3 drives. It's, so I think there was some rustiness across the league, which I think, will had an effect. And you saw that in 5, 6, 7, 8 different games across the league last night.
I think
Olly,
you could. I think you can tell that where people say defenses are ahead of offenses, it's so much. I guess it's easier to play against an offense that isn't clicking than against a defense, unless you're Justin Jefferson. But it's easier to play against if you're a defense. That defense ends up being a better defense against a poorer offense, and we saw an awful lot of that yesterday. Just as you said, Simon, just things not clicking. We also saw some weird play calling and clock management and some strange game management and game plans that teams just decided to not change until it was almost too late. So it was there was some bizarre stuff, but there was also some really fun, intriguing stuff, especially at the end of those 6 o'clock games, at the 2 going to overtime, 1 bizarrely going to a tie, multiple missed field goals and weird stuff going on. So it was an intriguing week 1, not a very high quality week 1.
I'm all right with that, though. I'm kind of all right with games being sloppy. I'm all right with almost having an upset in Saints Falcons when it's played in week 9 or so, when both teams are at full speed. You would expect the Saints to be able to dominate based on the talent they have. Maybe not. We'll see as it transpires. And there's always that thing of trying to not overreact to week 1. But I want to start with the fact that for the first time since 1999, both teams who featured in the Super Bowl last year lost their opening games. You would argue Los Angeles lost to the Super Bowl favorites in the Buffalo Bills. And we had a bit of a reaction to that on Friday. But the Cincinnati Bengals giving up 5 turnovers, giving up, and was it 7 sacks in the end of Joe Burrow, when the whole story for their offseason's been, if we can get the offensive line to be average, then we're going to be fine. We've gone out and we've picked up players. We've gone out and drafted players. We've gone out and picked up free agents. They've spent relatively big on that line. And as we saw, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and particularly TJ Watt prior to his pec injury, absolutely feasted. And it was kind of astonishing they were even in the game going into overtime, Simon.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I wonder whether it's an outlier or whether or not that's just the way the Bengals are. I thought La'el Collins was really average last night. It was a sort of a coming-of-age game for Alex Highsmith, the kid I really like coming out of college. Obviously, TJ Watt is a superstar, and the injury is huge. Interior-wise, I thought they played really well. But again, it just goes back to scheme is so important in the NFL. Scheme wins, and you look around the league at, look at the way that Kevin O'Connell was able to scheme against the really good defense of the Green Bay Packers. Look at the way that the Dolphins were able to scheme the ball to those skill position players to make yards after catch. Look at the way, most importantly, I think the Buffalo Bills sort of protected a weak cornerback group, with Tre'Davious White being out, and yet, didn't look at any point uncomfortable against the Rams on Thursday night. And I think just scheme was so important. And there were times where, especially during some rust, especially when teams with new coaches, new coordinators, et cetera, were trying to get their sea legs under them, that scheme really won on the opening day.
The feeling, you're absolutely right about scheme. I think my concern is that, and this is a problem all round with the Bengals, and I think with this offensive line idea in general, and we talked a bit about this with the Seahawks going into week one, how they spent big on that line, but if you don't have the coaching, it's never going to necessarily improve. And there was this idea that Joe Burrow did well despite what was in front of him, and then last night he just didn't look up to scratch. Was that a bit of preseason rustiness from him? Was that the fact that eventually that's going to catch up on you when you're being hit 10 plus times a game and sacked 5 plus times a game, that you're just never going to be able to succeed long term, even if you are a guy who can get the ball out quickly, who's got a live arm, who's got a great offense around him as well, even though T. Higgins did go down in the game?
I think you'll find that, from my point of view, I thought that Joe Burrow has all sort of leveled out slightly. Last season, teams and players and coaches, they get on a crest of a wave and they start sailing or surfing that wave, and things start to go well for you. Things that you do come off. Yesterday, it was a regression back to 2020. We're in 2020. 2020 Joe Burrow. Whereas, all right, in the second half, things did pick up, and getting the ball to Jamar Chase was imperative, and Joe Mixon getting the ball and finding some space, that was all great for Joe Burrow. But I think there was a certain bit of leveling out. We saw maybe what the real Joe Burrow is, rather than this crest of a wave imposter that potentially we saw last year.
That is the hottest.
Imposter is strong.
Mate, that is an unbelievably hot
It's a week one take, and I love it.
It's a terrible take, mate. I mean, what I think what's really interesting is that it just looked like 5 players who'd never played before in a game together. And people talk to you like we put our predictions from last week's podcast up on social media, and then got hammered for about 3 days by Bengals fans who bizarrely went really quiet yesterday evening. I don't know why, because I messaged every single one of them.
My mentions were fun.
But before the game, they were talking about how we've got a new offensive line, we've improved our only issue. Well, you go back and look at week one of the last 2 seasons. Week 1 last year against Minnesota, 35 pass blocking snaps. They allowed 4 sacks. They had 65 pass blocking snaps and allowed 7 sacks this week. So I'm not sold that immediately that's a vastly improved unit, and that's going to affect Joe Burrow not only in terms of the rhythm, the timing, not only in terms of Joe Mixon trying to run the ball, but the most important thing, and the sort of the underlying issue, the kind of the elephant in the room, is the health of your superstar quarterback, because he is a superstar quarterback. No matter what Olly says, he is a superstar in this league. You have to protect him. You know, he's already had an ACL injury. He was battered and bruised for the first 2 seasons. I'm of the belief that, you know, if the offensive line holds up last year in the Super Bowl, the Bengals drive down the field and win that game. So I think that unit just has to mesh really quickly, because that's a team that's got some difficult games coming up. And obviously, I'd like to hear from all those Bengals fans, although I don't.
I also think that the man referred to by Simon Clancy on our WhatsApp group last night as AFC Kingsbury has a huge amount to answer for, both in terms of the coaching, in terms of the play calling, in terms of punting the ball away in overtime while there's time on the clock, giving them enough time to drive down. Okay, escaping with a tie isn't necessarily the best thing in the world, as Colts fans will tell you, but it's better than losing.
That is somebody that got a crest of a wave last season, I think, in Zach Taylor. You know, I don't believe Joe Burrow ever did, but I think Zach Taylor kind of lucked out with the crest of a wave that team were on, in terms of that kind of the underdog, Chase, Mixon, Burrow, everything coming together and just, you know, having a great run, because he's not a very good coach.
Let's talk about some teams who made a bit of a statement in week 1 early doors. Again, I come back to the Bills on this, but we've covered that a little bit already. What about the Kansas City Chiefs? Now, they were going up against the NFC Kingsbury. Maybe that is a huge part of why they were able to move the ball so freely against a team that were lacking some key pieces, in a team that, you know, without those key pieces aren't very good. 5 touchdowns, 360 yards, spreading the ball about. Juju Smith-Schuster had 6 catches. Marcus Valdes-Scantling had 4 catches. There was a real diversity to that offense. And more than anything, they actually looked like they had a decent run game from week 1 to start the season. And that's not something we've seen from KC much recently.
Ollie? Because I'll answer it if you want me to. Because I just noticed a greater sense. Like everybody, we've heard it all before. Everybody talks about Tyreek Hill, right? And missing Tyreek Hill. And I actually thought what happened with Kansas City would be the sort of thing that would happen in Green Bay. More of a diversification in terms of the way that the ball went outside of Devontae Adams. Obviously, you've still got Travis Kelce in Kansas City. You've got those weapons, obviously brought in Juju Smith-Schuster and Marcus Valdez-Scantling, et cetera, et cetera. But I just thought it was Patrick Mahomes just took his game. It almost felt like he'd taken his game to another level yesterday. There was a sense of calm and a mastery of what he was trying to get accomplished. The ball came out quickly. He moved around the pocket sort of really easily. He was efficient. He kept his eyes down the field all the time when he had to buy time. And he was accurate. And when he gets into a rhythm like it helps that you're playing against Cliff Kingsbury's Arizona Cardinals, who aren't very good. And I think Kingsbury will get fired early this season. But I just thought it was just another evolution. People have been talking about Josh Allen and people talking about Joe Burrow and people talk about Justin Herbert. I think yesterday was like a knock at the door. It's like Patrick Mahomes, like, I'm still here, guys. Tyreek might have gone, but I'm still here.
I think what it showed was that Patrick Mahomes really embraced the challenge of losing his best receiver in inverted commas. So maybe Travis Kelce is his best receiver, but in losing his best receiver, he's decided and getting a load of new pieces in, players he hasn't played with before. You compare that to Aaron Rodgers, we'll definitely get onto him later, but Mahomes embraced the challenge compared to Rodgers not really, and already starting off with some moaning and some rolled eyes, etc. Whereas Mahomes dealing it all over the place. And then when you've got Clyde Edwards-Helaire kind of becoming that running back option that a lot of fantasy people thought he was 2 years ago, last year, I did this year, becoming that running option, then that just opens up everything else. And when everything else is opened up for a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, it's just scary for other teams, despite it being Cliff Kingsbury's Arizona Cardinals. And by the way, he's not the NFC's Cliff Kingsbury. He's just Cliff Kingsbury, just a terrible, terrible coach.
Look, I think as well, we're going to focus a lot on that Chiefs offense. 44 points, an unbelievable. Yeah, I think on their first 9 drives, they were going at 7.4 yards per play. They scored on 7 of those drives. It was an astonishing performance. But on the other side of the ball, this idea of Steve Spagnuolo's defenses don't start to pick up pace until mid-season. Again, we've got to consider it's week 1. The opponents might be shoddy, but I thought George Karlaftis looked really good. 4 pressures, 2 quarterback hits, hitting the ground running as a rookie. Chris Jones just absolutely kind of lived in the Cards backfield, even if the kind of stat line wasn't necessarily there for him. And actually, like, it just looked like Arizona's offense couldn't get anything going. I saw Kyler Murray, according to Next Gen Stats, was pressured on 44% of his dropbacks in the first half. That is an astonishing rate for a guy who's supposedly a guy who can escape the pocket, make scramble plays, do things with his legs. Only managed 2 passes over 15 air yards the whole game. We talked about how they're a team who tend to start fast and get slower as the year goes on, but without DeAndre Hopkins, they looked lost yesterday. No run game. Kyler couldn't do anything. Like, they got a couple of garbage time, or as Ollie Hunter likes to say, gunk time touchdowns in the fourth quarter. But they could have easily lost this game 44-7. Like, if Chiefs hadn't taken their foot off the gas, I imagine they would have done.
I mean, and Trent McDuffie, their first-round pick, was out with a hamstring injury, on that Chiefs defense. And I think it's a great point that you make. Yeah, the offense and Mahomes, who's unbeaten now in 5 for 8, thrown 18 touchdowns and 0 picks in his first week 1 games during his career, which is astonishing. But I think that offense is going to get the attention. But actually, the defense transforming from being slow and old, it's now young and it's fast. I think that might be the success story of the roster actually moving forwards, because you talk about guys like George Karlaftis and, Leo Chenal, the Wisconsin linebacker, and Willie Gay, who's there, and the way they've revolutionized that secondary, moved out, Tyrann Mathieu, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's really interesting moving forwards how well they play. And the flip side of that is that Arizona, like you say, they looked lost. They looked slow. I don't think, the Hollywood Brown experiment is fine, but I don't think, you're not, if you're relying on Hollywood Brown to take over from DeAndre Hopkins, then you're in big trouble. Obviously, Chase Edmonds gone as well, so they're, lost more speed on offense. I just think they couldn't protect him particularly well. And overall, they're just the game planning week after week with Kingsbury. I just don't see it. Missed tackles as well, defensively missed tackles. That Vance Joseph defense, I just, and I know it's indicative of what was going on around the league, Ollie, but like the missed tackles will just kill you, especially when you're playing the Chiefs.
And huge shout out, Justin Reed, the safety.
Unreal.
I heard it. I think I heard it on Red Zone that he kicked in high school. Some people have missed that he was a kicker in high school, but even so, what a leg! He booted 2 kickoffs out of the end zone. I think one of them he actually hit the uprights, the old crossbar challenge. He was 1 for 2 on extra points. It just it could be something in the future for rosters to have a look at if one of your guys can be a kicker. But shout out to that. Also, I'm glad it was done in week 1 because that was clearly the worst uniform matchup of the season.
It's important.
All red of the Cardinals with the white helmet, but then the white helmet and white jerseys with the red pants of the Kansas City Chiefs. #Kit Watch. It was a terrible, terrible one. A horrible eyesore. I'm glad it's out of the way. Move on. It was week 1. Phew.
All right. I want to talk really about every game this week. It's good. Normally on Monday, we tend to pick 3 or 4 things we really want to talk about and go in depth on, but you kind of can't avoid it in week 1. I do want to talk about my favorite play of the day. And my favorite play of the day, Simon Clancy, was 4th and 7 from the New England 42.
Yeah, as Tyreek Hill said in the locker room afterwards, Mike McDaniel's going to need a wheelchair to get his big balls out back into the car park. Although whether or not he's able to get into his car because he seemingly lost his car keys before the game, which was quite funny for the new head coach.
You've seen that episode of South Park where they all give themselves, testicular issues in order to get marijuana cards, and they're all using wheelbarrows or bouncing around on them like they're, what they call those space hoppers.
Right.
That's basically, that's Mike McDaniel's balls, basically.
Yeah, it was a great call, actually. I mean, it was a really interesting call as well because the Dolphins were leading 10-0 and there was still time left on the clock. If they'd have turned the ball over there at the 42, the Patriots 42, a couple of quick throws from Mac Jones and they're in field goal range. All of a sudden, and they've got a great kicker, long distance kicker. All of a sudden it's 10-3 in a game that really you should be 17-24-0 up, in terms of how the Dolphins played and kind of managed that game, save the first drive, which ended with the Javon Holland interception. But yeah, it was a great call. It was a great throw. Sort of zipped in between 3 defenders. Carl Duggar collided with another defender. Waddle just, gets free and gets in the end zone. You see, cuts to the crowd and there's a lot of sort of middle-aged men sort of waddling around like they're penguins, which is, hilarious himself.
I loved it.
It was a ballsy play, and McDaniel coached on the front foot yesterday, and it was interesting. I think if you're a Dolphins fan looking at it, quite apart from the individual performances, I think what you're looking at is real diversification of scheme on offense in terms of bunch formations, stacks, multiple motions, jet sweep motions. They had Cedric Wilson playing almost like a CFL receiver where he starts his run up from behind, and then by the time the snap of the ball, he hits the line of scrimmage, he's go switch releases, all sorts of things that I thought were really interesting. And they rolled 2 out a lot. There was a lot of misdirection. Difficult against such a disciplined team like New England defensively. Their pass rushers never really rush past the quarterbacks. So they're often in place for the rollouts and those sorts of things. But I think against teams that aren't quite as disciplined, I think that will really make hay for the Dolphins. But a really good, a good head coaching performance for McDaniel on his first game, and a great call, a gutsy call on the touchdown.
What about the Tua performance though?
I thought it was okay. I thought he made what I wanted to see with Tua going into the season, and were essentially, the off-platform throws when he's out of rhythm, when he's coming off his first read, and sometimes I felt like he played down to the level of competition and not up, whether or not he put the team on his shoulders. So he went to Tennessee last year, week 16, having to beat the Titans on the road to keep the playoff hopes alive and probably get into the playoffs. And he couldn't do it. He just played down. He looked small physically. And just, Justin Herbert he is big, but he just looks big. He looks like he's got all the confidence in the world. And there were times yesterday we made some really good throws. It was a really good throw to Durham Smythe up the seam. The Waddle touchdown was a great throw in between 3 defenders. But there was a couple of throws that would have taken it from a sort of a C+ to an A- in terms of, he bounced a couple of balls to Tyreek Hill that you just thought, that was what I wanted to see you do better. Off platform a couple of times when he was just made to move off his spot. He wasn't able to set his feet, and where you see like a strong arm quarterback like a Herbert was able to recover. There was a play yesterday where Herbert rolled out and sort of threw off one foot, and those are the things that Tua can't really. There was another play where late in the fourth quarter where he rolled out to his left and threw back across his body to Trent Sherfield, and it bounced. It was only like a 10 or 12 yard pass, but it bounced in front of Sherfield, and Sherfield had posted up at the goal line. It would have been a completion, could have fallen backwards into the end zone for a game-sealing touchdown. So lots of good, but not really answering some of the questions that I had coming in. And I think that needs to be cleaned up for next week, because you go on the road to Baltimore, M&T Bank Stadium. That is a big proposition. If he comes out of there winning and he hoovers up some of the issues that he had yesterday, then this team is good.
You know who he did look better than, though, is Mac Jones.
Mac Jones, yeah. I look better than Mac Jones, to be
fair. Mark gets in touch on the StreamYard comments. Yes, that's the thing. If you click on it, if you're watching us on Twitter, you can click on and you can leave some comments in there. He says Patriots have always struggled in Miami before and after Brady, definitely the bogey team, and also says that he thought Tua is a timing one-read quarterback. I think that's a little harsh, but I also think that Mike McDaniels is the right man to give him open reads. That's what the design was in San Francisco. And it's a game I haven't been able to watch back yet other than on Red Zone. It's one of the ones I'm really interested to go and watch back, but I'm really excited to see how that scheme comes together. And I really feel like Simon's comments on Tua are going to very much match the way that I felt about a certain San Francisco 49ers quarterback yesterday, where there were moments of brilliance and some really wobbly moments as well. Look, the difference
a bit like
being
their sideline.
The difference being tush and all of that. Look, for two and a half quarters, the San Francisco 49ers dominated the Chicago Bears, but didn't come away with anything of note. They outgained them. In the end, they still outgained them by 127 yards, but they gave up 99 yards in 12 penalties. Ill-disciplined, just absolutely horrendous. As we've seen from Kyle Shanahan, time and again, he got very conservative when the 49ers had the lead and didn't put his foot down and didn't when they were dominating the game. And it was a game where there were two blown coverages. Justin Fields took advantage of those two blown coverages, and that was enough to win the game for Chicago. I'll talk about Trey Lance. I just wanted to get this out of the way because I'm going to have to leave slightly early on this show, and I figured you were going to get annoyed if I didn't make sure I talked about it. There were two throws, which particularly a completion to Ray McLeod into a tight as anything window in at least double, if not triple coverage, that really showed the arm talent, really showed the potential that he has. A couple of deep throws as well that were very, very impressive, and a couple of really good plays with his legs as well that kind of showed you where that upside and that ceiling is. There were some plays with his legs that showed real naivety, where he stepped up in the pocket at the wrong moment when actually he would have done better staying in the pocket, or he stepped up too late when there was pressure coming around the back. There's a few of those awareness issues that I am concerned about. And there were probably three throws that highlighted where the issues were. The first one being targeting the replacement tight end, whose name has for some reason completely escaped my mind, and I can't stop thinking about the Bengals backup tight end for some reason. Tyler Croft was who I was thinking of for some reason. That's the only name that kept coming to mind. It is Tyler Croft. Yeah, I thought it was, and I'd said it, and then I went, doesn't he? Hold on, what? It was. So Tyler Croft. He was in as the direct replacement for George Kittle.
Crofty.
And there was what should have been a touchdown where Lance threw it to his outside shoulder, and Croft, just as he released the ball, stepped inside and moved upfield instead of heading for the corner, and it ended up sailing over his head. It was one of those where he continued running in the line he was running in, he would have caught it and it'd been at least a first and goal and probably a touchdown. Or if it was someone he had probably better communication with, better knowledge with, better chemistry with, he knows that they're going to make that cut upfield and he knows to throw it to the inside shoulder. That was the worst throw for me. The interception was horrible, and the throw just before the interception was horrible as well. But if I'm going to try and justify it as a 49ers fan, it was a monsoon of rain at that point being played on. Greg Popper on our call on radio called it Soldier Lake instead of Soldier Field. And the hope just has to be that it was a horrible situation for a player to have his, first proper start, third start overall, and that next week against Seattle in a cleaner situation, we might get to see more of the upside. But ups and downs, very disappointing result. but I kind of feel like the defense was so good in the first half. There was enough positives that I'm not crying into my cereal on Monday morning.
What I'd say, and I didn't see a lot of it because I was watching the Dolphins game, but what I would say is that it's hard for Trey Lance or anybody to overcome 12 penalties, some pretty average play calling, and a monsoon, right? I mean, you just can't countenance for that. I think you can see flashes of why the 49ers did what they did in terms of moving all that capital to get him, but also in terms of having the trust in him to say to Jimmy Garoppolo, look, time's up. It's time for Trey Lance. And ultimately, I think people melting down after a single game in torrential rain, Josh Allen would not have been Josh Allen without some serious patience, right? Because, Josh Allen is incredible right now, but go back and, 3-4 years and think about those first years. I think maybe people should have a little bit of patience for Trey Lance. It's one game in an absolute downpour, and I think overreacting to what happened is fool's gold.
He's played about a quarter of his entire snaps at quarterback in yesterday's game in the rain, which is insane.
We should give the Bears defense a little bit of love. A couple of those young players, particularly the safety Jaquan Brisker in particular, had a really good game. And if you want to find a kind of star player on the 49ers side, Hufanga, the safety who's come in and filled that role, had an absolutely sensational game. He had an interception, a tackle for loss, a sack, and 8 tackles in the first half. He was absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, he was such a big player at USC, but he just couldn't stay healthy, and his shoulders are held together like cheese wire. So, it's more power to him that he's turned it, because he was good last year as well. So, he's a really good player, really good leader. I do worry about the injuries, but if you can keep him healthy, then the ball just is attracted to him. He's a nice player.
I did see the venerable Jeff Schwartz, former offensive lineman and hot take machine on Twitter, said something along the lines of, after the Trey Lance interception, I didn't think Jimmy Garoppolo would be starting in week 2. He could be starting in week 2. However, if Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys decide that they are in desperate need of somebody better than Cooper Rush under center, because in what was, and I mean this with all sincerity, a truly dreadful game of football on Sunday night between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Cowboys. And I like a defensive game. I like an attritional game. I don't mind low scoring, and I never have. This was a tough watch, particularly when you consider that the Cowboys, and Dak only went out with 4 minutes remaining of the game, and arguably went out when they had no timeouts, when they were down 16 points and really didn't have an opportunity to go and win, and they kept playing him. Could be a problem in itself that they did that. But the first drive, I think they went 14 plays, about 55, 60 odd yards, and got a field goal. And then they just didn't move the ball beyond that. One more first down in the first half. The Bucs defense looked fantastic. The Cowboys offensive line looked anything but. Their lack of bringing in a second receiver looks like it could be really costly for them, behind CeeDee Lamb, who had a couple of nice plays. But yeah, it was as tough an opening game for the Cowboys as it could have possibly been. And next week they get the Bengals coming off a bit of a whooping in week 1. They're going to want to prove themselves, and they're going to get to do it most likely against a backup quarterback. I don't think it gets much easier for them next week.
Has Dak Prescott been Mike McCarthy'd? Is that what we're saying? I think it might have happened because it took 7 or 8 years in Green Bay for Aaron Rodgers to be Mike McCarthy'd, and maybe Dak Prescott has been Mike McCarthy'd. All right, he's now injured. But I lasted about a quarter of this game because, as you said, it was an attritional one, not even one for the purists. It's one for the Bucs fans, because they're the only ones that could have enjoyed any part of that game whatsoever. And CeeDee Lamb, in a fantasy draft, I accidentally drafted him 3rd, or maybe even 2nd. I don't know, because I was on auto draft. It was my birthday. I was having a lovely meal with the Chica. And I ended up drafting CeeDee Lamb. He took 2 of 11 catches last night. I mean, it's just woeful, the whole thing. So the Cowboys, I wonder, do they need a new quarterback more, or do they need Sean Payton more, a new head coach? They are shoddy beyond belief.
Dak was poor before the injury. And the lack of second option, CeeDee Lamb was blanketed. a lot. I actually thought Dalton Schultz had a half decent game. We saw a mix of the running game, unsurprisingly, but this was a game where, for the most part, defense is shining. I thought Devin White, Anton Winfield, Shaq Barrett all were brilliant for the Bucs last night. Micah Parsons himself had a decent game. And actually in the first half, Tampa Bay were moving the ball, but were restricted to 4 field goals and a missed field goal in the first half on the 5 drives where they actually managed to move the ball at all. So, it wasn't like the Cowboys defense played badly at all, managing to restrict Tom Brady's just the 1 touchdown in the second half as well. But yeah, that matchup, it looked like men against boys on the other side of the ball. And if I'm a Cowboys fan right now, I'm concerned.
I think this is what happens when you have your owner as the GM, right? I mean, they look slow and old on offense. And I didn't understand. They started running the ball pretty well with Ezekiel Elliott, and the line looked pretty good. Yeah, the rookie left tackle, Tyler Smith, there was a couple of plays where he was driving guys 6-7 yards down the field and pancaking them in the run game, mixing a bit of Tony Pollard. And then they started like double reverses and like CeeDee Lamb flipping the ball to Tony Pollard as he was about to be tackled and losing big yards. And I was just like, what are you doing? And if they are committed to getting rid of, the guys that they lost in, whether they're trading Amari Cooper or whatever, the expectation is that CeeDee Lamb then has to step up and fulfill that role as a number one. And he summarily failed to do it yesterday. I know James Washington is injured. I know Michael Gallup is injured, and things will change when they come back. But, rolling with Noah Brown and the undrafted rookie whose name completely escaped, Dennis Houston, just wasn't good enough. Schultz is fine, but he's a really good complementary piece when that offense is really going. But you're almost having to he was almost like the first option for Dak. The spacing on offense wasn't great at all. I thought the play calling was really poor. They tried a couple of times to get manufactured touches to Turpin and didn't really work. And I think the biggest problem for the Cowboys is Sean Payton is the sword of Damocles that is sort of hanging over the head of Mike McCarthy, because this team isn't going anywhere. And I think the injury to Prescott essentially, and I can't work out whether or not the injury to Prescott makes McCarthy sacking inevitable, or even more quickly inevitable, or whether or not it almost gives him some respite in that, you're going in with Cooper Rush for 6 to 8 weeks. And therefore, if you end up 2-6, then that's going to be okay because you've had to do it without Dak Prescott. But I just think when Sean Payton's out there, what he could do for that team, what he could do for that offense, they just need speed. They need some talent. And they've just, even on the offensive line, you go back a few years and you look at Travis Frederick and Zach Martin and the Tyron Smith and those guys, and it's a shell team. It really is a shell team, and they're kind of hanging on by 3 or 4 young players who have got some upside, led by Micah Parsons, who's essentially the best player on that team by a country mile already. I could see the Cowboys really struggling to win 6 games this year, and I think Mike McCarthy will be sacked, and probably deservedly so.
Well, look, they're also the only team who didn't win in the NFC East. And sadly, I'm going to have to sign off because I've got to go and have another meeting about post-Monarch plans. But I've broken my hand. I'm off to go and get surgery. No, that makes Mike McQuaid Cooper Rush, which is far too mean. He's much more Jimmy Garoppolo. The best backup in the league coming in my place. So I will leave it to you. And I'm going to tee you up nicely with they were the only team to not win in the NFC East, including a shock win for the New York Giants.
That was literally what I was about to say. And these lads can see the live chat on this podcast. Style, I'll start with you. Obviously, great to see you lads. Fantastic week 1. A lot of Giants fans that I'm mates with, I feel like it's Christmas Day today. What was Mike Vrabel doing, Si, on that play? I think it was 3rd and 1 with Derrick Henry. Some seriously interesting decisions made yesterday, wasn't there?
You know how Pep Guardiola gets to Champions League finals and sort of makes really weird decisions with lineups and things, and sort of you feel like he's outthinking himself. It just felt like that's what the Titans did. They had more than enough. They had a comfortable lead and they just let it slip. And I just think, kudos to Brian Daboll and the Giants. I love the story that Peter King told this morning in terms of how 2 things really that Daboll had said that certain things. He played a clip of the Alex Rodriguez documentary that's on Netflix, and there's a bit where a 24-year-old A-Rod goes up to somebody and says, this is not acceptable. A much older player in the team says this is not acceptable. And Daywell said, this season losing is not acceptable. It's not acceptable. But I love the story that I love most of all was on that final drive when he goes over to his offensive coordinator and literally says that there's about a minute and a half left, and he says, "Get your best 2-point play ready," because Daywell literally got his 5 sort of defensive leaders over and said, "Look, I'm thinking of going for 2 if we score here. What do you think? Because you're the guys that are out there playing. I don't want to let you guys down." And unanimously, it's 5 for 5 with guys saying, "Go for it, go for it." So, and that's what they did. And I think, some kudos to Daniel Jones, some kudos to Saquon Barkley. I thought they both played really well. I thought Dayball, it felt like the Giants really grew into that game in the second half. I thought that the offensive line held up okay. I thought defensively they were okay, but that Mike Vrabel call, that's the sort of thing where he just, I doubt there'll have been much sleep in the Vrabel household last night because it was fairly inexplicable. And then, they still had time to move down the field. Ryan Tannehill completes that great throw to Carl Phillips, the over the shoulder to set them up for Randy Bullock. And then, kickers, man, you can't countenance somebody's going to just hook one left from, in severely makeable distance. But a good win for the Giants. Football is better when the Giants are, competitive. And I don't know that Daniel Jones is the long-term answer. I don't know that Saquon's going to stay healthy. But, Brian Daboll is experienced and he's creative. And I think those two will work well together. We talked about in the preview. I think Jones and Daboll will work well together. And I thought it was a better version of Daniel Jones than we've perhaps seen for a little while. So, the NFC East might be competitive and not with the Dallas Cowboys.
Which everybody wants to see, apart from Cowboys fans.
Apart from Cowboys fans.
Yeah, of course. But I think it showed the togetherness that the Giants have, and it's something that they really haven't had for a few seasons now, quite a few seasons now, that togetherness. And Daboll coming in and showing the clip that you mentioned, he showed another one where it's about keeping... You don't get on your teammate's back. You don't have a go at your teammate. It's all about respect and love for your teammate, and that's exactly what's happened with the New York Giants. They had each other's back, and it was encapsulated in those final moments. And for me, as a Penn State guy, it's great to see Saquon Barkley just kind of back. And we saw, and you shouldn't really look at what goes on in preseason too heavily, but some of the clips that the Giants were releasing and some of the stuff that Saquon was doing in the limited time that he had in preseason showed that he could be back to somewhere near his best. And all right, the first half yesterday from the Giants was dreadful. I mean, they were as bad as the Chicago Bears in the first half, and they didn't have a monsoon to deal with. But as you said, Simon, growing into the game, things starting to come off, more confidence, more belief in themselves, receivers starting to make plays. The throw to Sterling Shepard and the touchdown was almost encapsulated that, the 68-yard run down the sideline from Saquon Barkley, where the blocking up front was great for him. And then he makes a little juke move that he probably wasn't making last year, especially when he was injured. But so New York Football Giants being back good. You're 100% right, Simon, is good for the NFC, because I'm not saying they're back 100% back because we're just in week 1, but it's bodes well for a division which has been pretty useless over the last couple of years.
Mike, what I think is interesting now as well with the Giants is, and I'm not getting ahead of myself, but you think at home to the Panthers, okay, that's a winnable game next Sunday. Then at home to the Cowboys, Cooper Rush rather than Dak Prescott, or there may be a trade. We may see Jimmy Garoppolo, but nevertheless, as we stand right now, there's 2 winnable games. And then at home to the Bears, all 3 of the next 3 games are all at home against the Bears. Then you go to Green Bay, then you host the Ravens, and then you go to the Jaguars. You could be looking at a Giants team that's potentially 4-0 by the 2nd of October, and by the 23rd of October could be 5-2. I don't think that's beyond the realms of possibility. And who would have thought that? But these are 3 really winnable games. And I think that's, when Brian Daboll gets back in the building this morning, or he'll already be there now, but, that's the thing he's going to be hammering home is, look, guys, this division is wide open. It's wide open. And we could be 4-0 in a month's time. And, there's a lot to play for in the East.
Imagine the Giants enter London week 5 4-0. I think the thing that stood out for me last night, lads, honestly, and it's quite simple, is it was what that victory meant to them. and incorporated with, obviously, Olly, you were saying about Saquon Barkley back 164 yards on a day, and it was great to see him come back. I ironically on a different podcast said a few days ago that I thought he wouldn't be able to replicate his old success. So
you're pouring yourself out to other media. Is that what you're saying?
A little bit like Ollie's Joe Burrow comment at the start of the show, but I'm gonna sort of switch this now in one sense. I think it was mid-third quarter, lads, yesterday. Brian Dable was giving Daniel Jones a bollocking on the sideline. There was another guy going crazy on the sideline yesterday, and that was Aaron Rodgers. I'm presuming, I was sitting producing this for the last half an hour. We haven't talked about this Packers situation yet, lads. I mean,
I thought we'd get away with
stuff. 23-7, and like, well, I'll start with you, because I know you're the big Packers fan. Aaron Rodgers to me yesterday looked like a man that, I wouldn't say he was fed up, but when you hear the Fox analyst on the sideline say that he described Davante Adams as his safety net, it's a wee bit like worrying for me as a football fan watching it.
As a Packers fan, it's worrying. But then look what happened last year, where they lost 38-3 against the New Orleans Saints in Jacksonville, first game of the season, and then Rodgers goes and does what he does. But he didn't. This time we don't have Davante Adams, and we have a pair of young receivers, one of whom dropped a ball on the first play, the first offensive play of the game, and you could just see Aaron Rodgers' face just go. I know they were trying to put a nice spin on it. Greg Olsen, who I thought had a really good game yesterday, and the commentator were trying to twist it and say, "Oh, look, he's going to have to. He's got patience. He's not shouting at his guy." There's nothing else. He had a face like thunder. If Watson catches that, and Aaron Rodgers said in post match, he doesn't do ifs and buts, but he made a big point of, actually, if Walton does catch that, then the game could be completely different, and it could have been. I think that Rodgers' problems were that you had Jenkins and Bakhtiari ruled out at the beginning of the game. So two bona fide first rounders, or two bona fide first teamers, first picks, not starting. So that's one extra thing to have in Rodgers' mind. The dropped catch on the first play, another little thing to have in his mind. And it just not clicking, it just not working. And when it doesn't click, and I mentioned Patrick Mahomes at the beginning of the podcast, beginning of the show, he relished the challenge. It seemed like off the back of that first drop, Rodgers wasn't totally there for the challenge. I don't know whether you agree with that, Simon.
Yeah, I mean, the things that concern me, look, you talk about Bakhtiari and Jenkins, obviously everybody's going to miss, but David Bakhtiari hasn't played for,
True.
a year now. Josh Nijman played pretty well last year at left tackle. So, that's a concern for me in terms of, yes, Elton Jenkins is really good, but you're getting back Josh Myers at center. You're a year on with John Runyon. Zach Tom is a good player. I thought he played well when he came in.
Yeah.
The thing that concerns me, two things that concern me really, is the defense. I didn't think played very well at all. And post game, when Matt LaFleur is calling out the effort of his team, and then Jared Alexander is essentially calling out the game planning. I don't. We were told that our game plan was to stop 18 Justin Jefferson, and we didn't do it. And I wasn't. I wasn't there covering him. That the plan was for me not to cover him, which I find bizarre because Alexander, top 5, top 7 corner in the league, against arguably Davante Adams aside, the best wide receiver in the NFL. I don't understand that personally. Okay, I thought Kenny Clark played very well. He's a monster inside. But that worries me that already in week 1 that the coach is calling out the effort, one of your star defenders is calling out the game planning. That's a concern. I think if you're a Green Bay fan, we all rushed to judgment week 1, okay? Oh, it's terrible. The walls are falling in. Green Bay were essentially a 4th and goal stop and the Christian Watson inexplicable touchdown drop away from being up 17-14. Realistically, the game completely changes. I hated that play call on 4th and goal at the 1, just trying to Dylan's a big guy, 255 pounds, you're trying to run him up the inside, but Rodgers does such a great job with his ball handling in terms of his ball. How many times have we seen Rodgers just keep it, hide the ball, roll out, roll in, score touchdown while everybody's looking at the back, diving in?
Well, he said after the game, it's on him. He should have kept that ball and walked it in. He said afterwards, and so he blamed. I thought it was quite magnanimous of him actually after the game, where
I think he does that very well. He protects his team. I think he does a good job of that, and he generally protects his coaches. And I know there's all this history about Rodgers says this, but actually I think he always does a really good job of protecting players, not throwing guys under the bus. He was clearly frustrated with the Watson drop. Who wouldn't be? But it's not like he went over and screamed at him. And there's clearly a bunch of confidence in Christian Watson. He missed a lot of preseason. He had surgery, missed a lot of training camp. Romeo Dobbs was the star of training camp, and Watson actually got the start over Dobbs. I think there's an awful lot to clean up. And what you don't want is Rodgers going back to playing hero ball, which is what he did in the dying realms of the Mike McCarthy era, which was, you have so much talent, you have so much arm talent that you just think that, and look, who are we to argue in a way with arguably the greatest pure thrower of all time? But, that kind of hero ball element of just putting everything on your shoulders and thinking that you can do it. And, no matter how great he is, and he is, it just didn't work. And actually what we've seen under Matt LaFleur is the way that, Rodgers said, I want to be coached. And the last couple of seasons, he's won MVPs. He's been coached hard. And the Packers have been outstanding. He's been outstanding. I don't think you need to over panic necessarily. You're going to start to see those guys dripping back in terms of Jenkins, in terms of hopefully Bakhtiari, and hopefully we're back close to that level. Reestablishing the run game. I thought Dillon and Jones, generally played really well. There is a lack of talent at wide receiver, and you do have to call into question whether or not, in the last couple of years of his career, whether or not trading away Devontae Adams was a great idea. You can argue that till the cows come home, essentially, and the proof will essentially be in the pudding of whether Watson and Dobbs and those guys develop and train on. The early returns aren't great, but I can't see anything other than Green Bay picking up a number of wins, moving forwards. Rodgers starting to feel more relaxed, diversifying, getting the ball out, trust, all those sorts of things. And the Vikings are no mugs. It's not a bad team. Kirk Cousins is a good player. Dalvin Cook's an elite running back. You've got, like I said, great receivers in Jefferson and in Adam Thielen. So look, going and losing on the road, I think it's just the manner with which. But games are decided by a handful of plays, and if Green Bay, if things had fallen the right way, we might have been looking at a very different result.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally concur. And from a Vikings point of view, they got the game plan absolutely bang on. Moving Jefferson across the line. I think half of his snaps came in the outside positions. The other half at the slot receiver. He had a couple at in the backfield and one at tight end. So they're moving him around. But it was his movement and recognizing that it was zonal coverage in that first half, and Jair Alexander, he just ran away from Jair Alexander. And that's, if teams work that out from Green Bay, all right, they adjusted second half, then that's the way to beat this heralded Green Bay defense. But there is no cause to panic, Packers fans. Thank you, Simon. You've really, really reassured me.
No worries, buddy.
Well, you've got the Bears on Sunday Night Football, so I mean, if I was a Packers fan right now, I'd be delighted. Even though
you're
1-1.
You're 1-1.
It's the perfect bounce back game, isn't it?
Let's see what happens. Lads, even just round us up, because as Will said, there was that much stuff that happened yesterday. Let's give maybe 1 point each. I'll jump on the Jaguars Commanders game. It was like the most yo-yo game ever. At one point, you didn't know who was going to win, who wanted to win. Carson Wentz had two interceptions, but he had 4 passing touchdowns and over 300 yards. That guy is like the most enjoyable / inconsistent / annoying quarterback to watch ever. And the guy is the rookie Dotson, wide receiver, had two touchdowns on the day as well. Like, it wasn't the classic side, but it was good crack to watch. I really enjoyed it. We haven't talked about the Chargers Raiders, have we?
No, we haven't. No.
I've seen some of the videos that you've been posting, Michael, from your own Twitter account, which I love, retweeted at Gridiron. But some of those Justin Herbert throws, the laser for the touchdown was outrageous. And then there was a throw where he sort of slight wheel to the right, and then it's a crossing guy over the right, and he's at his 50 or midfield, and the ball, I can't remember the receiver, but it goes to the 5-yard line, and it's pinpoint over the shoulder catch, over the shoulder throw catch. This boy, Simon, did you expect this kind of player coming out of college a couple of years ago?
No, I hold my hands up. I thought he'd be a complete bust, if I'm completely honest. I worried, the athletic. The physical talent was always there. I was worried about the mental side of things in terms of like he was a small town kid, had never left Corvallis. I thought he was very quiet. I've spoken to a number of coaches at Oregon and people around the school there, and they said he was very quiet, humble. You know, he's the sort of guy that went home and spent the evening with his parents. He didn't hang out with his, you know, he didn't have friends, but he didn't hang out. He wasn't that kind of kid. Okay. And I just felt like, and the biggest issue for me, and actually it's the point I want to make about his NFL career, is that he just didn't win the big game. You know, there were times where he obviously won the Rose Bowl in his final game, but actually, ironically, that was done with his legs rather than with his throwing arm. I think he had 3 touchdowns in the Rose Bowl in that game. But my concern with him in the NFL was, can he win the big game? Can he get over the hump? Can he just, and I think yesterday was really important because when the Raiders started to come back, actually, you know, there was enough there. The Chargers were able to hold off and he was able to win a really big division game, essentially on the road. I know they were at home, but, you know, they were having to go silent count because the Raiders fans were so loud inside the Chargers home stadium, which is phenomenal. I know the Raiders travel well, but nevertheless. So for me, for Justin Herbert, the one area of improvement I wanted to see this year was winning a big game, was taking, not that he can't put the team on his shoulders because he's already proven that he can do that, but just get over the line. I know that QB wins are a really over-exaggerated, rather pointless stat, but you live and die on what the quarterback does. And I just think for me, for Justin to it would almost invigorate him to know that he can get over the line and win a big game and to do that and to go on the road to KC and do that and to all those things, because the talent is just next level ridiculous. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And he can, you know, we're in such a golden era of amazing young quarterbacks. And I know, you know, we've sort of seen the dying embers of Tom Brady and you know, some of the senior guys and the Aaron Rodgers, but this group of guys that is coming through with Burrow and with Mahomes, who's obviously a bit more established, but Burrow and Josh Allen, you know, and here's this kid, Justin Herbert, he's just unbelievable every week. He just makes 3 or 4 throws that you're just like, how does he do that? The arm strength is absolutely unbelievable. So, yeah. And I think the biggest thing for me actually about the Chargers was their defense. You know, the secondary looked good. Brandon Staley's obviously a great, you know, defensive mind, and Khalil Mack, you know, coming back with 3 sacks, you know, because if that defense is half decent, then that Chargers team could really threaten, because there's a whole world of talent and significantly worse quarterbacks have got to the Super Bowl than Justin Herbert. He is he's an absolute stud.
Roll on Thursday night. That's going to be a hell of a game, lads, on Thursday night. Is there any final comments, lads, to make on this week? I would go as far as saying for me it was honestly the most enjoyable week one that I've watched in recent times, at least. But I tell you what, let's end it in this for the people listening to this podcast on a Monday evening before they maybe go to bed or get a cup of tea before they watch Monday Night Football. Who's winning tonight, the Broncos or the Seahawks, lads?
I mean, the Broncos for me, absolutely. Russ will march back in. The 12s will give him hell, and they will roll away with a pretty comfortable victory. I can't see anything other than a 3-touchdown Broncos win.
Yeah, I can't disagree with Simon there. I think it's exactly the kind of thing that Russ will thrive on. And finally, he's got a good defense behind him. He's got had some quality receivers in Seattle, but he's got a really good offense to work with as well. So, and I think actually the other thing is that Seattle's quarterback stinks. So there's not I can't see many points being put up by the Seahawks. One
thing I'd like to say actually about week one was that I thought that the Lions were impressive, and actually they are a quarterback away from. I know I predicted them to go to the playoffs, and I'm going to stick with that. But I think there are if the Lions had a Justin Herbert or a Joe Burrow or a Patrick Mahomes, one of those young drafted quarterbacks, and maybe that happens this year with a Will Levis or a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud or one of these guys that comes out. Devin Leary, whoever it may be, Anthony Richardson. I think that they could be primed. There's a lot of talent. I'm so impressed with that run game in the bits that I saw yesterday. In terms of that offensive line is so good. They took on a really, really good defensive line and were able to move the ball pretty consistently with the run game. And Ben Johnson looks like a really creative offensive coordinator. I think all the things are moving in the right direction in Detroit. And you just think, you go back to the draft a little bit and think, what if they'd taken a Malik Willis? And I know the sample size is so small in terms of what Willis has done, and it's only preseason in Tennessee, but you think if they had that guy on the roster that they could just begin to develop, and they don't have it yet. And, whether even if they do draft a guy like a Levis or whoever, these guys like Herbert and Burrow are outliers, really, in terms of coming in and just setting the league alight in the first first season. You know what I mean? It does take a little while for these guys to develop. And you just feel like Detroit are close. They keep pushing. They're drafting well. They're really well coached. The culture is great. If they can just get a quarterback, this is a team that I think a lot. And unless you follow a team in the NFC North, I think you're going to be looking at the Detroit Lions and thinking, yeah, this is a team you almost want to do well, because you look back at those guys, like the Herman Moores and the Calvin Johnsons and the Barry Sanders and the Willie Roast and all these great players from Lomas Browns, and you go back and this is a team that you can kind of get behind, gritty, kind of hardworking, all the cliches, but it's true. This kind of working class. They've got, like I say, great coach, great leadership, and Brad Holmes looks to be doing a really good job. So if they can just get that quarterback, just get them over the hump. Who wouldn't want to see a big old playoff game at Ford Field? It would be a not since the Wayne Fonts era, is it, that they've had a playoff game in Detroit? That would be pretty.
Or a meaningful Thanksgiving game, Simon.
Yeah, exactly. When they're not like 1-8 or whatever it is. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd be 100% behind a Detroit revival with a really good quarterback.
Yeah, 35-38 yesterday. I mean, 70? I'm getting my GCSE maths out here. 73 points in one game. I mean, it was an enjoyable game, even though seeing red zone and that.
Kudos to the Eagles as well, for Eagles fans out there thinking, you haven't talked about everybody but us. AJ Brown, I thought, was excellent.
Yeah.
Jalen Hurts made a lot of plays with his legs, didn't start very well, but and defensively they've got some serious talent. So but I would be a bit concerned if I was Nick Sirianni, just looking at that and thinking, okay, we kind of we kept Detroit hanging out. How good are Detroit? That'll be the first thing that the Eagles are thinking today is like, how good are this Lions team, or how are we really good and they're really good, or did we just play down to their level, or because this is a sort of a under the radar, sneaky sort of potential NFC champion in the Eagles in terms of their talent and in a weak NFC. So be interesting for Nick Sirianni this morning.
Let's see what happens for the next few weeks. One thing for sure is we're not going to stop talking. We're not going to stop debating. You're not going to stop talking to Bengals fans on Twitter. I'm loving it at the minute. It's great.
Absolutely, I welcome it all. I welcome it all.
And all those Mac Jones fans as well, Simon.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Where are they? For MVP chats that I saw by some of the national media. Where they go after you?
I love those tweets from you. They're magnificent.
But one thing for sure is, lads, football is back. You got the Monday Night Football tonight. If you are listening in on the podcast, check out the link, the Beer 52 link. You get a free case of beer. You just have to pay for postage. We'll try and get these two lads here, and we'll Gavin a box as well. Really, really enjoyed it, lads. Hopefully see you next Monday again. It's been great fun going on live, and enjoy tonight and enjoy Thursday as well.
We were live.
We were live the whole time.
I'm sure Will said that he couldn't see that we were live.
Yeah.
Cheers, James.
Thanks, lads.
Thank you.